One wrong turn, and the world stood still. It sounds like hyperbole, something a movie trailer might whisper over a swelling orchestral score. But in late March 2021, that line became reality. For 6 days, in a single cargo ship, the Ever Given held more than $10 billion of global trade per day hostage, stuck diagonally across the Suez Canal, one of the most vital arteries of global commerce. It didn't just block ships, it blocked nations, supermarkets, gas stations, factories, and entire economies suddenly stared into the void of uncertainty. Because one vessel went sideways, how could this have happened? How could a single error by a crew, a storm, or a misjudged command paralyze 12% of all global trade? And what does it reveal about our increasingly fragile, interconnected world, where the fate of continents might hinge on one narrow waterway and one captain's decision? This is not just a story about a ship running aground. It's a story about hubris, pressure, systemic failure, and the illusion of control on the high seas. On the morning of the 23rd of March, 2021, the Ever Given, a gargantuan container ship measuring 400 meters long and 59 meters wide, began its scheduled transit through the southern end of the Suez Canal. Its destination was Rotterdam, its origin somewhere in Asia. Its mission, move 17, 000 containers full of the world's goods to European markets fast, commanded by Captain Krishnan Kanthavel, a veteran mariner from India. The vessel carried a crew of 25 and cargo valued at nearly $1 billion, but it also carries something far more volatile: expectations. The global shipping industry operates like a symphony with no margin for error, a just-in-time operation. One delay can ripple outward across thousands of companies, tens of thousands of workers, and billions in contracts. So when winds howled across the Red Sea that morning, and several other vessels chose to delay their passage, the Ever Given pressed forward. It's the captain's choice always, but few captains are truly free from economic gravity. Every second you're not moving, said one shipping executive, you're losing money. In narrow waterways like the Suez Canal, standard procedure mandates, bringing local pilots on board. These are expert navigators familiar with every bend, current, and sandbar. But they don't steer, they advise. The captain remains, in theory, in charge. On this day, 2 Egyptian pilots came aboard, and the atmosphere on the bridge captured by the ship's voyage data recorder VDR quickly turned tense. As the wind picked up and the ship began to sway, the pilots began to argue about speed, about wind, about course correction. Insults were traded. Tone escalated. At one point, one of the Egyptian pilots threatened to abandon ship, an almost unthinkable act. In the middle of this chaos, a command was issued: full ahead. To the average person, speeding up might seem reckless, but in nautical terms, going faster often improves rudder control. It helps a massive ship cut through wind and resist drift, but not in a narrow canal. Not when the physics, specifically Bernoulli's principle, begins working against you. As the Ever Given sped up, pressure around its hull dropped, and the ship was subtly but dangerously sucked toward the canal's edge. What followed was inevitable. The bow slammed into the sand on one bank. The stern grounded on the other. The Ever Given, one of the largest objects humans have ever put on water, was stuck diagonally, unmovable. The Suez Canal was closed. At first, the world didn't quite grasp the scale of what had happened. But hour by hour, as ships piled up behind the Ever Given, as oil prices jittered and supply chains froze, it became clear this wasn't just a traffic jam. This was a global choke point, now choked. The first question asked by everyone from Cairo to Tokyo to Washington was simple. How could this happen? And the answer wasn't simple at all. Initially, strong winds were blamed. Satellite data did confirm a sandstorm that morning fierce enough to make some captains reconsider passage. But winds alone weren't new to the Suez. They happen every year, sometimes for months. That wasn't enough. Was it human error, mechanical failure, miscommunication? What emerged in the weeks following were court testimonies, VDR transcripts, and interviews with everyone from canal engineers to maritime lawyers. According to evidence presented in an Egyptian court, the two pilots on the bridge were in open conflict. Their argument turned into a shouting match, distracting the entire crew during the most critical phase of navigation. At one point, the captain attempted to de-escalate, but cultural and linguistic barriers, Arabic and English competing in a stressful situation, made calm impossible. Then came the fatal mistake. Increasing speed, possibly to regain control, but instead worsening the situation. Bernoulli's principle kicked in. The faster a ship moves in a tight channel, the more the water pressure drops around the hull. That suction effect can pull a vessel toward a canal wall and make overcorrection inevitable. The Ever Given veered once too hard and embedded its bow 6 meters deep into rocky sand. The Suez Canal Authority rushed tugs to the site, but their combined power was laughably insufficient. The ship didn't budge. From space, the image was surreal, a lone excavator, dwarfed by a steel wall of hull, chipping away at sand like a toy. The image went viral, a symbol of hopeless resistance, of humanity dwarfed by its own machines. Behind the scenes, the stakes were rising. Global supply chains were bleeding money. By some estimates, 400 ships were trapped, queued on either side. Burning fuel, burning time, losing contracts, and every day the canal remained blocked. $10 billion of trade was delayed. This wasn't just a shipping story. It was a financial crisis in slow motion. As the hours turned to days, the Suez Canal Authority, under the command of Chairman Osama Rabi, realized that brute force would not be enough. The Ever Given was not merely stuck, it was entombed. So they called for help. Enter Smit Salvage, a Dutch firm renowned for deep-sea rescues and maritime disaster response. Their team of engineers, divers, and nautical experts arrived swiftly, bringing not just heavy equipment, but also hard truths. Their first recommendation was straightforward. Lighten the ship. Begin removing containers, but removing even a fraction of the 17. Zero containers from a vessel 50 meters tall in the middle of a desert, with no crane infrastructure, and during a storm was, in practical terms, nearly impossible. It could take weeks or months, and the global economy didn't have weeks to wait. So a compromise was made. Tugs would continue to pull, excavators would keep digging, and if all else failed, then the containers would come off. But nature, strangely, had other plans. On the 28th of March, two massive tugboats, the Baraka 1 and Carlo Magno, arrived with a combined pulling power of nearly 300 tons. That night, the moon brought a gift, a supermoon with a rare spring tide. The water level rose higher than it had in weeks. And still, the Ever Given didn't move. Until it did. With no sound, no warning, tugboat captains suddenly realized they were being pulled forward. The stern of the Ever Given the rear was breaking free. Salvage crews cheered. Horns blew. Dredgers waved flags. but there was still danger ahead. If the bow were suddenly released, it could whiplash across the canal, destroying anything in its path. So 4 cables had been quietly rigged to the shoreline to restrain the ship's nose should it lurch. And then, with one final effort, aided by tide, tug, and ballast, the bow lifted. The Ever Given was free. For 6 days, it had held the world hostage. Now it floated once again. And for one brief moment, a crew of exhausted engineers, local workers, and salvage veterans celebrated on the canal's banks like they'd won a war. Because in a sense, they had. But the story wasn't over. The Ever Given was towed to the Great Bitter Lake, a wide natural basin midway along the canal. There, it dropped anchor not to rest, but because it was now the subject of an international legal standoff. The Egyptian government wanted payment. Initially, they demanded $916 million in compensation. This included canal damage, salvage costs, and perhaps most controversially, reputational harm. The ship's owners, Shoei Kisen Kaisha, a Japanese company, balked. Their insurers pushed back. A quiet storm of litigation brewed across shipping courts and corporate boardrooms. Eventually, the ask was reduced to $550 million, and a confidential settlement was reached. The Ever Given was allowed to leave in July 2021, 4 months after the crisis began. But what was truly revealed during those months was not just about wind or piloting or maritime law. It was about fragility. In a world built on efficiency, there is almost no room left for error. The shipping industry, in its race to reduce cost and maximize volume, had created vessels too big to fail and canals too narrow to falter. And the Ever Given showed us just how precarious that balance is. You see, when the Suez Canal was first built in the 19th century, it was hailed as a marvel, a bridge between empires, a shortcut for goods and glory. But in the 21st century, it had become a bottleneck, a narrow artery for a planet pumping ever more material goods, ever faster. Look around your room. One journalist said, everything you see, your furniture, your food, your phone, it probably came by ship and probably through Suez. For 1 week, that invisible system became visible, and what we saw was that it was far more vulnerable than we thought. Since the Ever Given's release, shipping lines have reassessed risk, countries have debated alternatives, the Suez Canal Authority announced plans to widen and reinforce key stretches of the canal, but deep down, everyone in the industry knows this will happen again. The ships are still growing. The margins are still shrinking. The pressure to move faster, cheaper, with less room for delay is greater than ever. And somewhere out there, another storm is building. Because the danger isn't just the size of the ship, it's the scale of our dependence. The next time a captain hesitates at the mouth of a canal, will he turn back? Or will he push forward and roll the dice again? Because sometimes, the only thing standing between civilization and chaos is one decision, in one moment, on one bridge whispered in one language, and misunderstood in another